So, hey everybody, welcome to the Engine Room. This is the little podcast where we try to tackle big problems out there. In today's guest, we have Casper, who is the founder of SparkForce, and we will be talking about what you need to do when you're not hitting your marketing goals, your KPIs. How do you assess that and move forward, right?
Yes.
So, welcome, Casper.
Thank you.
It is Q4.
Yes.
Times are tough.
Yeah.
And you've been a head of marketing. I've been sitting under a few head of marketings, and it's a very common thing that things are just not performing, right?
Yeah, I think you've never really been a head of marketing until you tried this.
No.
Like this happens to everyone. And I think also it's good to have a plan. But I also think it's important that we talk about the distinction between what you do in Q4 and what you do the rest of the year. Because those things are different. And you might not always treat them different, but they're very different. So should we start in Q4?
Let's do it. It's the most pressing.
It's the most pressing one. So, and it's also the most controversial one. Because like in most B2B SaaS companies, when it comes to Q4, there's actually very little you can do. And I think that's the first realization you need to come to. And it kind of sucks for most people, but most of, at least the companies we work with, some like the sales cycles are longer than 90 days, right? Or and even if they're longer than 60 days or 30 days even, during Q4, you can most likely not impact the intake, at least of close-won revenue that happens in Q4. So when sales are asking for, hey, we want to close stuff, and they might be, and it's also funny because like sometimes you have sales teams that ask for leads, but that's because they also forget that they most likely can't close any new lead that comes in Q4 anyways. So what you actually can do, and this is the part that matters, right, is you can help influence the pipeline that's already there. So what I mean with that is typically like you want to take all the opportunities you have, and then you want to evaluate how far in the sales process they are. So let's say you have a classic sounds wrong, but we see a lot of cases with 6 months sales cycles, right? 4 to 6 months. It's very common. Okay, then you say, okay, what are the ones that have been passed over a certain threshold? Let's say 50% of their sales cycles. Maybe they are doing a POC, or they've done some steps that have told you, okay, they're pretty far in their journey. There's some things you need to do. So here, what I would do is, what you can do is like, you can create a battle plan for winning them. That could be like stuff like setting up sophisticated retargeting that targets those type of people. So like, let's say you can take your account list, so literally take all the accounts you have that are past a certain point in your pipeline, upload those to whatever platform you want to do, LinkedIn, Facebook, doesn't really matter too much technically, but then run specific campaigns towards those people. That's a pretty good hack. And I think it's also, what you can do there is also try to influence the other stakeholders, right? So typically what a lot of companies do is once they have the opportunity in the door or the lead, it's like, okay, cool, this is my champion. That's the only person I'm going to talk to. But what you, especially when they're considering buying your product, let's say it's a little bit more of an expensive product, well, then there's more stakeholders involved. And while, a good example of saying like, let's say you're trying to sell to the head of marketing. Well, the head of marketing still needs to clear it by the CFO. And based on where they are in your pipeline, they might haven't cleared it yet. They might have like expressed a lot of interest, they really like it, but they need to clear with their CFO. Okay, normally you probably wouldn't target the CFO, but right now in Q4, that might be a good way. So just like actually target the CFO with like, hey, if you buy our tool, you save X amount of money on next year's budget. Okay, cool. That's messaging that works towards the CFO. He's not your main champion, but he's like the gatekeeper. And you need to pass the gatekeeper in this case. This is just me making up an example, but yeah. So I think stuff like that works really well. Then I think it also, and typically, and this is also where the relegation typically happens, is that sales comes to marketing and says, hey, we need help in Q4, and marketing goes, hey, we're already looking at Q1 and Q2 next year, right? So what you can do, however, is help sales with what we call classic sales enablement. So being like, okay, if you have these are the ones you're trying to sell to, let's use the example from before, you're trying to sell to the CFO, but you don't have a good one-pager to convince him that he should buy, or whatever it is, right? For some reason. Okay, well, maybe you can shift some of your efforts to producing that one-pager. So those are like those type of examples are classic sales enablement, where you activate your salespeople, you give them the tools they need. Maybe you can write a blog post or a guide that would suit that part of the journey a bit better. So producing some sort of collateral that works in the later part of the buying process, that's also a good way to do it.
Yep.
So then there's the last option, and this is more like this only works if you have like short sales cycles, like in general. Then let's say you're at the start of Q4 now. As recording, we're kind of getting to the middle of it, but let's say you were in early parts of October. Then technically what you could do, if you're not doing it already, is turn up all the bottom funnel high intent stuff. What that means, so stuff like Google Ads, where people are searching for a software solution. It's like, hey, I'm specifically searching for this software solution. What you'll probably, that could be an example. It could also be a G2, a Capterra. So turning up those, G2 is a little bit different, but Capterra. So turning up the bids for some of the categories where you know you convert fast. That could also be another high intent play. So those type of plays might work, and I say might because it depends on a lot of things. But the reason they might work is that because those things typically travel faster in your buying process, because there's a lot of internal stakeholder management that's sometimes already been done when the high intent searches come in. I'm saying maybe, doesn't work every time, but if you want to have any bet on like what can realistically come in 1st of October and potentially close by the end of December, well, high intent stuff from Google Ads, review sites are a really good bet.
Yeah. I want to add a comment on that before we move on to how to assess performance and potentially, improve for the next quarter. So I think with Google Ads, it's really important to have a focus and an emphasis on keywords that end with software, solution, platforms. And when we say high intent, right?
Yeah.
It's really a case of not necessarily bidding on your brand. That's traffic you would be getting anyway. Yeah. But maybe it's your brand versus ex-competitor. Yeah. And then with the suite of those high intent keywords, right?
Exactly.
So when we're then looking at things you can sort of do, because I think it's a tricky situation. Do you then try and end Q4 in a nice way, or do you try and then use that energy and that money to then improve the next year, right?
Exactly. That's a really good point. Yeah.
I was in a position where, I think it was August or maybe June, something like that. I remember I came to you, right?
Yeah.
And we were like, okay, things are definitely not working here. We tried to do the revenue analysis, and I was like completely mumbled in my head in the sense that where do we actually toss and turn here, right? And I think that's very interesting. Now that happened like at the end of Q2. Yeah. So in that sense, it was good timing. But how do you sort of see that? Can you walk us through like the optimal steps? Because we see with client we have here as well, right? Where they're like, hey guys, can you come in and help us? Like what is actually working here and where should we put our money moving forward? How does that work in practice?
That's a good question. And it's also a hard question to answer. And I think that's also, I think the first realization you need to come to with all this, because like essentially we're going to talk attribution in a second, right? But when we talk attribution and when we talk about like proving or quantifying where you get your value from, I think fundamentally you need to understand that it's never going to be perfect. And I think that's the big disclaimer you need to have before you enter talk about it.
Yeah.
With that said, then you always start in your CRM. Like at the end of the day, no matter what, your CRM dictates if things are going the right direction or not. If you're not closing any deals, then it doesn't matter how many conversions you have, right? Like if things are not progressing, if you're not seeing anything in your pipeline, then yeah, that's what it is. So I think you always start in your CRM. Now let's assume just for a second that you have a proper CRM setup. And here but let's say you have a pretty good like HubSpot, maybe a good Salesforce setup or something. Not necessarily a bad pipe drive active campaign setup. No shots fired. But I think let's assume you have a pretty good setup here. Then you can get pretty far. But the problem with a lot of those setups, like both HubSpot and Salesforce, Pardot or Marketo or whatever it would be, is that a lot of them rely on what we call last touch attribution, and sometimes you can also flip it, and which is not necessarily much better, first touch, right? So first touch or last touch. And for those who are not aware, that refers to the last touch is the one that dictates who won the deal, right? So let's say I click, I've been seeing a bunch of ads on LinkedIn, I've been going to events, I've been chatting with you, Magnus, been hanging out, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of the day, I search SparkForce on Google, and then I click a Google ad. Then in the CRM, it would look like Google Ads was the right source.
Yeah.
Right? So, and based on our conversation now, we all know that's bullshit, right? Sorry for language. But that's not really the case. So I think what you need to do is, I call it the 4 pillars of attribution these days. And that's the way you want to get to in terms of getting to the foundation of where you want to be. Like, very few people I've met, very few cases we work with actually have this in place. So it's not, so no shots fired if you don't. But this is what I would work towards if I were really you. Because I think that's our starting point. So the first thing you want to do is you want to have a clean CRM. And when a clean CRM, that sounds so easy, but that's by far the hardest thing to do. I think 9 out of 10 CRMs I would say that we look at are not clean. I think 1 out of 10, maybe I'll be like 1 out of 5. 1 out of 5 is clean. And when I say clean, it's never going to be perfect, but it's like, okay, data is being put in properly by the SDRs, by the BDRs, and by the AEs, and marketing is also tracking stuff properly. Like, that's the foundation. If that's working, then that's a clean CRM in my world. So that's the first thing. So you want to have a CRM with some form attributions, so stuff like HubSpot or Part.forms or something like that. Then the second part is you probably want to have some attribution tool, Dream Data, Hockey Stack, whatever. Just as a flag, I think that's my biggest takeaway. We typically, like, there's a free version of Dream Data and stuff, but my takeaway is typically you want to have a certain level of spend before you go into these things. So if you're spending less than 10,000 euros a month, don't spend too much of your time on attribution, like generally speaking. Yeah. Once you go above 10,000 euros, and this is just benchmarks, but then it starts to become interesting, because then you can actually get something out of it. Because other than that, the tool cost of having stuff like that is going to drain you too much. Yeah. So then the second part is getting an attribution tool. An attribution tool will take you pretty far. Like, that won't get you all the way, but it will, like, I like to use this as an example of saying, like, your CRM, if properly cleaned, will probably give you 30-40% visibility. Your attribution tool will take you the next 20%. So that will get you to 60. I'm just making up these numbers, but it's just to give an idea of how I kind of see it, right? Because like, there's no golden truth here. No. Like, nobody really knows. Yeah. So that's the second pillar. It's some sort of attribution tool. Dream Data, Hockey Stack are like the preferred ones in my opinion, but there are others. Then there's the third pillar, and that's actually a very simple one. So maybe it should be, but it's very easy to implement. It's what I call self-reported attribution. So that's just essentially having on your forms, like, hey, how did you hear about this? If you notice on SparkForce forms, we have that field, and that is the interesting part, because like that allows you to get a lot of data, but qualitative. That was the right word. Mm-hmm. Qualitative data on where people actually find you, and it's so funny because like whenever we have it, we get like, hey, a referral from this specific person. You can get that stuff later down the stage if you have your sales team talk to them. But that also requires them to report it back properly. And I know that typically breaks. Yep. And don't get me wrong, self-report is not perfect. People often forget, and they have a tendency to overvalue certain events and stuff like that. That's fine. But combining it with other things, that gives you a pretty good like indication of what's going on. Because if you have these 3 sources, your CRM is telling one thing, your attribution system is telling another, and then you have your self-reporting, then that makes you at least capable of making a better decision. Because then you know, okay, this played a part, this also played a part, and this played a part, right? Whereas if you only looked at one, the CRM would be like, hey, it's only paid ads, only paid search. Then you'd be like, okay, 100% budget for paid search, right? But now in your attribution tool, it says like, oh, LinkedIn is super important. Okay, cool. Like, let's allocate 60-40, 60 for LinkedIn, 40 for paid search. And then maybe you have the last one. It was this referral from this guy. I know I've seen you guys everywhere. Okay, so there's also met him at an event. Let's say that, right? Yep. So now suddenly you have 3 angles, and like, okay, that's how my budget splits should be. Now, the last one I want to add, it doesn't necessarily add anything, but it's also one of those tools that have come up recently that I want to add. It's just LinkedIn recently released what they call RAR, Revenue Attribution Report. And that's a free version. It's trying to do the same thing as Dream Data and Hockey Stack, but it's free to set up and it ties into your CRM. And I think you would put that on as well. It doesn't add too much to the attribution oversight, but it gives you a pretty good idea of like how your money's being spent. You can do the same with Facebook to an extent, Meta. So, to answer your question, I know it's a long one, but those are the 4 things I would do to get visibility, right? So the first step is getting visibility into as you said, what actually works. Like you can't make decisions if you have no idea about what works. Now, that's the first thing. Then you have to analyze the data, right? Like, and then you also have to say, as I said in the beginning, you have to accept that there's a point where you can't like prove stuff anymore. Like if you can't prove that the podcast we're doing now is influencing, then this is going to sound a little bit off, but my go-to is actually to say, if it feels right, keep doing it. Yeah. And I know it sounds so lame, but your data will take you 80% of the way. The last 20%, if it feels right, keep doing it, right? Like if people come up to you and say, hey, I love the podcast, or hey, I've been listening to this stuff, keep doing it. If it doesn't show up in attribution stuff, don't worry, just keep doing it. Don't get me wrong, I've also audited cases where, yeah, we produced 50 blog posts and it feels really good. And then we go in and like, okay, there's been 5 people who read your blog post in 6 years. That's not, there's a mismatch here. So I'm not saying completely ignore the data. I'm just saying your data can take you almost all the way, but can't take you the entire way.
Right.
And so sometimes it's also about gut feeling. But I think if you have those things in place, then at least gives you visibility into what's performing on a high level, right? Then you can always start to say, okay, what's not performing on a fundamental level? Like if it's like, why is LinkedIn not performing? I think a classic mistake, and this is where very much if you talk to other C-levels, is that they're very quick to cut a channel. They look at sometimes being too data driven can also be a bad thing. I've seen very exceptionally good performance marketeers cut programs that are good, and you'll be like, well, why are they doing that? Or cut channels that are good. Like I think why would they do that? But like they look at the data, like, hey, this doesn't look good. But sometimes you just have to say, what's the underlying root cause, right? And I don't think there's a perfect playbook for saying that, but you can go in like a lot of the stuff we do, right? It's like going in and analyzing like. If we're doing all the right ads, if you're like, hey, that ad looks good. It's animated, it has movement, it's like the CTA is right, all that stuff is right. Like everything on a surface level looks like this would be a good ad. But for some reason, it's not working. And then let's take an example, right? So you have this ad, it's not working, it's getting a high CTR. So there's a high click-through rate. That means that people are resonating with the ad. So they're actually clicking on that, right? But then when they come to the website, there's 0 conversions. Nothing comes through. Even budgets high, all this stuff. Then my conclusion to that would be like, okay, we're resonating with them on the platform, so that means we're probably targeting the right people. Something's resonating, but when they come to the landing page, they're not finding what they would like to find.
Right.
So then it becomes a website problem. And then you can say, okay, then I need to allocate resource mindset towards changing that part. And I think that mentality of just like, that's how you need to look at the data. Because it could also be like, let's say you have an ad where like on surface level, everything would be good, but the CTR is super low, like very low. Then be like, okay, that could be an indication that what we're trying to say to these people is not resonating, like it's not resonating. And then it could be 2 things, either our messaging is off or positioning towards these people is off, or even worse to some extent, I would say maybe, our targeting is off. Like we're targeting the wrong people. Like I'm targeting a CFO, I should be targeting the head of marketing. Very different people.
Right.
So those are kind of like the analysis part you can do after. But I think the first part is getting those 4 pillars in place. The problem, of course, is if you're listening to this and you haven't done those 4 pillars, this doesn't happen overnight.
Definitely doesn't, no.
No. So, yeah.
I think one great addition to that, if you can actually implement the 4 pillars, right? Because as we know, it does take time, is to go out there and talk to your current customers, right?
Yes.
And be able to differentiate between an average customer profile and an ideal customer profile. And then for the ideal customer profiles, right, which we want more of, we can ask them, hey, if you were in the market again today, what would you be looking for, right? What kind of pain points do you have or did you have before buying a product? And really trying to get under their skin in terms of that, because they're going to be honest with you, right?
Yeah.
Now, you can't take that as a single source of truth, but it can definitely be an addition to what else is going on.
There's actually, in growth hacking, and this is a massive credit to Sean Ellis, who wrote the original growth hacking book. He used to do I think he still does, but a survey. And there was like one really critical question that I've kind of taken with me that I always ask. So what you should ask your customers is that the first question, or the first one, one of the questions, core questions you should ask them is, how would you feel if this product disappeared today? So essentially saying, if I, like, let's say, let's use Slack. We use Slack at SparkForce. How would this impact your day-to-day if Slack disappeared? How bad would this be for you? And that gives you a pretty good idea of like, is this a need to have product or is it a nice to have? I have multiple products where I'm like, if I lost that product, it would be really bad. Slack being an example. We could make other things work. It's not like, I guess we could set Teams up. We could do WhatsApp or something. So there are alternatives. So it's not, it would be game breaking day one, but it wouldn't be game breaking over time, probably. That's what I'm trying to say.
For sure.
But it would hurt a lot. And there are other tools where, like, if you told me I lost access to, let's take, we have a note taker, and I love the tool, Sybil. Fucking amazing, really great tool. We use it a lot for taking notes in meetings and stuff. But if I lost it today, I would go out and find an alternative tomorrow. Very easy. Like, it doesn't have any business critical, it doesn't do anything different. Whereas, like, if we lost Slack, that's pretty critical. Teams is not Slack, right? Like, or if we lost, we use Notion, that would be a little bit hard, right? Like, if we lost Notion as well. So there are these kind of tools, and that's a really good question to ask. That's just what I'm getting back to. And it's a classic growth hacking question, actually, from that discipline.
Absolutely. So let's say, let's try and potentially simmer it down a notch, right? So there's a lot of like strategic things here that you can get moving.
Yeah.
But if we're looking into 2025 and we were sitting in-house as head of marketing in these companies, maybe we come in, maybe we've been there for a little bit, things are not quite working, right? No matter what sort of motion you're running, whether it be ABM, lead gen, demand gen, whatever, right? If we were to like simmer it down in a like 1 through 5 step process, with 1 being the first step and potentially the most important, right? Yeah. How would you sort of then rank that?
I think it's a little bit hard because, like, at the end of the day, it's like you can't. It's so easy to say that it all depends, right? Like, everything depends. So, but the most important part is that your foundation is in place. And when I say you need a foundation to make decisions, so whether that is implementing those 4 pillars I talked about, whether that is cleaning up your CRM or whatever it is, or also just redoing your ICP positioning, like but of course, I think we always talk a lot about ICP and positioning. Those are not the projects that will move the needle for Q4. No, just if you're listening and thinking that, then you're wrong. But those are the things that will save your next year, right? So I think to boil it down, you need a foundation to be in place. You need to have a foundation where you can make decisions. And having this attribution part solved to some extent, as much as you can, don't overdo it. I think a lot of companies are spending too much time on it. But spend some time on making sure the foundation's right. That would be my number 1. Once your foundation is right, then you can actually do number 2, which is the analysis, right? And then you can figure out, okay, is the problem ICP? Is it positioning? Is it the platforms? Is it our imagery? Is it our design? Whatever it is. So foundation, clean starting point, analysis, and then you can start ideating, right? So that's kind of step 3, coming up with ideas. Or like, so coming up and say like, okay, what are the things we can actually do? I use typically there's something called ICE framework. It stands for ease, cost, and impact. Impact, cost, ease. That's and that's a good way to score. So score your ideas from 1 to 5 to say like, okay, what's the impact of this idea? Like, and here, that's a good way to look at it. If you look at Q4 and you're talking about positioning, impact 0. Let's be real. Yep. But impact Google Ads times 10, potentially 4, 3, something. It might have an impact, right? Then there's the cost of doing positioning. Well, that's big, but might, impact for next year, huge. Q4, it's a big cost, right? Then there's the ease, like changing your positioning. At least if you're a small company, it might be a little bit easier. But if you're 200, 300 plus people, then it's not that easy. Then it's a big task, right? So scoring your ideas based on that would be my thing. And then I think it's also important, like if you're still in Q4, if you're still in crunch mode, but also just in general, whenever you do these things, when you come up with ideas for things you want to change to like fix your marketing, it's broken. come up with what I call a minimum viable test. So you come up with your idea. So let's say my idea is that we're targeting the wrong people. Let's say that. Like we're targeting the wrong people. I'm not 100% sure, but it looks like it. Then say like, okay, over the next 2 weeks, you give yourself 2 weeks. If you're a bigger company, you give yourself one week. But you give yourself 2 weeks. Then you set up, in order to figure out if we're targeting the wrong people, what would be a KPI we could look at that will tell us if we're doing that? And here, CTR would be a good example. Like that will at least indicate, okay, something's off. And then you can also be like, okay, and then we can, another way could also be the leads we're getting in, show them to sales. If there's a hit rate, ICP qualification level that's too low, that could also be another way. I'm just spitballing here, but it's just to say, you define what is a minimum viable test. So by the end of the 2 weeks, you will have defined, okay, was it wrong or was it true? Like, was it true we were targeting the wrong people or was it wrong? So you give yourself 2 weeks to test it, because sometimes you need testing time, right? And then you can say, okay, cool, we've tested, it was the wrong people, now we change everything. Sometimes you just know, and then you just go ahead. But most of the time you don't. And then you set up what I call a minimum viable test. And I think a lot of people, what they do is that they start testing without no end goal for their testing. They don't really know what they're testing. They don't know, like, when does this look good? Like, it's a classic, we always ask, what does good look like? Right? That's a good question to think about. Like, also in marketing in general, also for your performance, because like, when you say to me, performance looks bad, I'm like, okay, compared to what? Right? If you increase the amount of high intent leads, but your MQLs are dropping, some will say that looks awful, and some, like us, probably will say that looks great.
Yeah.
So it depends on where you're looking at. So it also, like, a lot of part of this and asking that question is getting the right people in the room and saying, like, okay, what does good look like? When is marketing doing good? And that starts at revenue and it ends at somewhere else. Some leading indicators, right?
Absolutely. And I think with that, we'll actually say that was a brilliant sort of little TED talk on how to actually assess performance.
I could talk about this forever.
Oh, there's plenty more topics to cover, right?
Yeah.
But I think in essence, what is really key is to have the foundation right. Don't make hasty conclusions.
Yeah.
Try and not be too biased in terms of data versus no data, but it's a blended thing, right? There's not a single source of truth. And then I think that's really it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's it. I think it's also important to stakeholder align, right? So if you're in this dirt, like grunt part of and it's not going so well, also be straight with your team, especially your sales teams, right? Be like, hey guys, these are the things I can do that will impact Q4. These are the things I want to do to fix next year.
Right.
And just be real and like, these are what I'm like, here's what I'm doing for the future. Here's what I'm doing right now. Because also, like, I've had teams before, like that stakeholder management is all about expectation setting. It's all about expectation setting. Being like, hey, I know you want me to deliver this. I can't do that. Here's the reason why. Explain it with graphs, explain visually, explain this is why I can't do these things. I want to do it. I want to help you as much as I can. These are the things I can't do within my control to help you. These are the things that I can't, but I will do next year, potentially to help you get there next year. That conversation is really, really healthy.
Yeah.
And everyone should do that, no matter if you're down or up technically. But
yeah. So if there's one final thing to say, marketing teams always take responsibility.
Yes.
For your funnel. Don't just leave it to sales.
Take ownership.
Take ownership.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks for listening, guys.
That's it.
Bye.